Hi, and welcome back to the Pale Threshold. So, as some of you might have noticed, I will be shifting the trajectory of my channel. We're going to be handling more things like the unexplained and things related to modern phenomena in our world that I think it's important to address. Today we're going to be discussing the phenomena of gangstalking. Now, this can mean a lot of different things. There are parts of it that are very real. There are parts of it that are mental illness. But the great thing is that you can address all of these issues at once using a lot of the same techniques. So it doesn't really matter if you're actually being followed or not, because a lot of the steps that you're going to go through to combat said gangstalking are going to be very similar. And I will be, I think, creating some videos about the techniques that you'll use. Yes. So let's talk about a few things first. I don't want to disclose too many details about my friend because obviously this is very personal. I take HIPAA regulation very seriously, even though I'm not a mental health professional. I think your right to medical privacy is tantamount. But I do know people who are also going through some of the things having to do with gangstalking. And I myself, as a lot of you who watch the channel are aware, I was experiencing it a lot last year. Not as much this year, but we'll go into some of the things about it. So first, there's this book called The Battle for Your Brain, and it's by this woman named Nita Farahani. And she does have videos up on YouTube, so you can watch the videos and learn a lot about her research through those as well. Basically, she's talking about algorithms and mind control. So people can end up influenced towards certain decisions because we're all plugged into this algorithm, so to speak. Now, your involvement in that algorithm, and we'll get into that a bit later, is entirely up to you. You can choose to buy in, you can choose not to buy in. But of course, all of the devices that you use, your phone, if you use a Fitbit, if you use Apple Watch, if you have Alexa in your home, all of these things are tracking your movements and things about you that you might not even realize. So if you, for example, are wearing a Fitbit, they can track where you go. And that can cross over into your medical privacy. If you go to a clinic and then they see that you sit in this parking lot for 2 hours and that you're on the phone with your mother, then there's some potential for people to know that you have had a serious diagnosis. And I believe that particular example was given in an Edward Snowden video. So these devices can also track certain parts of your, I wouldn't call it personality, but like things like boredom, things like rest, So were you asleep at a certain time? Were you not asleep? Dr. Farahani talks specifically about, what is it called? Let me look through my notes. Dream induction? Dream incubation. So basically, if you wake up briefly and then there are certain sights and sounds that are played, and then you fall back asleep, those things can affect your dream and your consciousness that then follows. And so she was saying that the Coors marketing team during the Super Bowl was investigating using dream incubation for advertising purposes. And maybe you think that's ethical, maybe you don't. So tracking these unconscious responses that you have through your devices it's a very blunt tool, but it can be used in specific ways through inference. Okay, so we've kind of set the stage for these algorithms and how they can be used to control and or monitor behavior. But gangstalking itself is not just rooted in these mundane capabilities. I don't remember whether or not I mentioned pushers previously on this channel, but certain people are pushers. And what I mean by that is that they can influence your emotional and mental states using energetic push. And you might not even recognize that that's what's happening at first. But when you start to kind of feel these manufactured emotions or ways of being that are not true to your essence, and that's why it's very important to get true to your essence. We'll get into that though. You will understand when you are being influenced. Now, a lot of people can do this, but with gangstalking specifically, it's going to be one or two people. And depending on the resources that these people have is going to depend on what other phenomena you experience in relation to the gangstalking. So it could just be one person, but if they have a lot of resources, they might be hiring other people to follow you around also. So there's mundane aspects and there's also these metaphysical aspects. The father and son, the Cronenbergs, have actually dealt with, there's a couple movies that I recommend you watch. There's Scanners, obviously 1981 classic by David Cronenberg, that goes into pushing, I think. Now, obviously, nobody's making someone's head explode with psychic powers, but it really gives you like a better understanding of how that can be used to influence the people around you. And then there's another movie that Brandon Cronenberg, who is his son, put out in 2020, which is called Possessor. And those of you who are fans of Andrea Riseborough, she's the star of the movie, so I really recommend you watch that one. It's amazing. And basically in that movie, she is hired to enter other people's bodies and then do things as that person, usually unaliving other people. But I recommend you watch that movie as well. That one isn't as much like how it actually works, but it can kind of give you some ideas as to like how that influence would then affect other people. Now, I strongly believe that in these cases, they're not going to get you to do something that you wouldn't already do. So they can cause these ideas to be justified to the point that you might do something that you wouldn't already do. But if you're the kind of person who would, for example, if you found out that there were human rights abuses going on in a place, if you're the kind of person who would get very protective of that and go in somewhere and potentially take your own action on that account, that sort of thing has actually happened. So let's talk a little bit about how do you, as an individual who feels like you're being influenced by pushers or gang stalking, how do you take steps to work against that? So how do we work against these behaviors that other people are doing? They could be doing it just against us. They could be doing it against a whole group of people. And it might be very hard to find those other people and track them down, but maybe you can. So the first step is you really need to be clear of mind while this is going on. Now, this is probably going to be the hardest part for a lot of people, especially because these pushing behaviors oftentimes will include self-destructive urges. But it's super important if you are able to get sober and not be, consuming alcohol, marijuana, any intoxicating substances for the most part. Every once in a while is fine, but you need to be clear of mind while this is going on. It's super important. But if you're not able to do that, I totally understand. And I'm not judging. I'm just saying that it will make your job a lot easier in the long run. Another one that I had put later on the list, cultivating a mindfulness, compassionate mindset. So compassionate mindfulness is really going to help you out as far as your discernment is concerned, and as far as your behavioral output toward others is concerned. Because if you're all wound up and you're feeling super paranoid and you suspect everybody of being part of this huge conspiracy, your reactions to other people are going to be affected by that in a really adverse way. And it's going to alienate you. And that is their goal. Their goal is to alienate and confuse and muddy the waters and just create chaos. But one thing that you have to keep in mind is that chaos is not as tightly controlled as it seems. So there are going to be very specific things that will let you know that this is going on. Things like coincidence. One particular example that I will talk about is that if you're doing like a food order and they're saying if you screw up this person's order, and then the person ends up having a name that's very similar or almost identical to a very close friend that they've been signaling you about. So that's going to be a telltale sign to you that there is something else going on. And then something bad might happen right after that. But if you're operating from this place of compassion and love toward everyone around you, it's going to be much harder for them to control that aspect of you. So you do need to try to figure out who is targeting you. You need to try to figure out, is this somebody that I know? Is this somebody that I've encountered maybe even just in passing? Are they part of a specific organization? You need to figure out exactly who is involved, whether you know their name, whether you know anything about them. It will make it so much easier for you to figure out how to combat that. So now let's talk a little bit about how to remove that influence. How are you going to push that out? One thing that you can use to make the signaling stop, I do recommend getting involved with a therapist, somebody who is either aware of psychic phenomena in a non-judgmental way, or somebody who specializes in gangstalking. Finding somebody who specializes in this type of phenomena is going to be crucial. And there are a few techniques as well that you can use, because not everybody has the resources, especially if you're in this position. You might have gotten very close to the end of your rope. There's something called CBTP. And what that means is cognitive behavioral therapy for psychosis. Now, you don't have to be psychotic in order to use these techniques, because what we're dealing with primarily is the voices and the messaging. So what I'm going to try to do, of course, I'm not a mental health care professional, but I'm going to try to put out some videos upcoming that have to do with CBTP, so that you can go through these techniques, ideally in your dream induction state, right, as ASMR, and use these to push any of that influence out, or at least get started on that path. I'll be using a lot of scripts, so it won't be material that I'm inventing. It'll be stuff like worksheets that I'm translating into video form, basically. And then possibly medication. Now, I have not opted for the medication route. I'm going to be using the CBTP and compassionate mindfulness to push through these issues on my own. And I do have a therapist that I see on a weekly basis who is very understanding of my personal condition, and to have that is so crucial, and I'm so grateful that I have access to that resource, because it really is making a huge difference in my own personal situation. And then let's get back to the algorithm-based systems. So when you're dealing with algorithms, you don't want to be too plugged into them, and you want to be aware of what they're doing. If you wear a Fitbit or an Apple Watch or something like that, I recommend that you stop wearing it for a while, or you do things to kind of throw it off, leave it in your car, leave it at a friend's house, things like that. There's also any of you, I don't know why anybody has Alexa. My parents do. I'm not sure why they did that, but they seem to like it, so I don't argue with them about it. And think about your online media presence. So things like YouTube are very algorithm driven. There's a social media site that I use called Tumblr, which is not algorithm driven at all. And I recommend it as social media, honestly. I actually like using it a lot. Snapchat gives me anxiety. So, there are a few different things that you can use that are not super algorithm driven, but will still keep you connected to the people around you. So I think that's probably going to wrap it up for this video. If you would like, please put your comments down below. No hate. It will get deleted immediately. I don't tolerate that here on my channel. Anybody who wants to come on here and put out bad vibes, that's just not what we're about here. I try to keep it super positive in the comments as much as possible. Again, with the compassionate mindfulness, that is so, I really cannot emphasize enough how important it is to have clarity of mind and compassionate mindfulness. Nobody's perfect. I'm certainly not perfect. But cultivating that in your life while this is occurring is really going to make a huge difference and move you forward in the way that you need to go to push all of this out of your life. So, again, don't fear the pale threshold, and I look forward to seeing you again soon.